The Omen in the Sky. The winter of 1811 didn't start with a bang. It started with a silence that felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket over the frontier town of New Madrid, Missouri Territory. John Bradbury, a British naturalist traveling down the Mississippi, felt it first in his bones. The birds had stopped singing. The squirrels, usually frantic in their search for winter nuts, had vanished into the hollows of the oaks. Even the great river itself, a mile-wide serpent of brown water, seemed to move with a sluggish, oily hesitation. "Something is coming," Bradbury whispered to his French-Canadian boatmen. They laughed, clutching their jugs of whiskey, but their eyes remained fixed on the horizon. For weeks, the great comet of 1811 had been hanging in the sky, a ghostly, smearing streak of light that the locals called the Dragon's Tail. To the settlers, it was a beautiful curiosity. To the Shawnee leader, Tecumseh, it was a signal. He had been traveling from tribe to tribe, telling the indigenous peoples that when he stamped his foot in Detroit, the ground would tremble in distant lands. In the small cabins of New Madrid, families huddled around hearths. They were tough people, trappers, farmers, and outlaws who had fled the civilized East for a chance at land. They had survived fever, floods, and raids. They thought they knew the earth. They were wrong. The Midnight Fracture. At exactly 2:15 a.m. on December 16, the world broke. It didn't start with a shake. It started with a sound, a deep subsonic thrumming that vibrated through the floorboards and into the teeth of every sleeping child in the territory. Within seconds, the thrumming turned into a mechanical scream. Eliza Bryan, a resident of New Madrid, was thrown from her bed as the chimney of her cabin disintegrated. In the pitch black, she heard the sound of the forest being crushed. Giant oaks, hundreds of years old, were snapping like dry matchsticks as the earth beneath them buckled. Then came the smell. The air suddenly filled with the stench of rotten eggs, sulfur trapped for millennia in the deep strata of the Reelfoot Rift, now escaping through massive fissures in the ground. "The judgment!" someone screamed in the street. "The day of judgment is here!" But it wasn't God. It was the North American plate grinding against itself along a hidden fault line that no mapmaker had ever dared to draw. The river runs backward. The most terrifying sight was reserved for those on the water. A flatboat captain named George Sarpy was anchored near a sandbar when the quake hit. In the moonlight, he saw the unimaginable. The bed of the Mississippi River rose, a massive section of the earth pushed upward, creating a temporary dam. For several agonizing minutes, the current of the greatest river in North America reversed. The water roared upstream, carrying boats, debris, and screaming men back toward the north. Huge whirlpools formed as the river swallowed whole islands. Islands that had been landmarks for decades, Island number 94, Island number 67, simply vanished into the abyss as the ground beneath them liquefied. This was soil liquefaction. The solid earth had turned into a quicksand-like mush, vomiting up sand blows, massive geysers of black sand and coal that shot 30 feet into the air. The silence of the ruin. By dawn, the town of New Madrid was gone, not burned, not flooded, but sunken. The land had dropped by 15 feet in some places. Where there had been dry cornfields, there were now black, bottomless lakes. The survivors stood in the freezing mud, wrapped in blankets, watching the Dragon's Tail comet fade into the morning light. They thought the nightmare was over. They didn't know that this was only the first of 3 massive quakes. The earth would continue to scream for another 4 months.
In Washington, D.C., President James Madison felt the tremors in the White House, rattling the crystal chandeliers. It was the first time a natural disaster had gripped the entire American consciousness, from the untamed West to the halls of power. The Prophet and the General. The story continues to detail the 1812 quakes, the formation of Reelfoot Lake, and the intersection of this disaster with the War of 1812.